One of the things I learned on the street was to trust life and to keep hands off of it. And that same feeling continues in the rest of the work I do, the landscape or portraits or any interest that I have. Things are good enough as they are. There's no reason to tamper with them.
Hi there. Joel Meyerowitz has established a distinctive look and feel to his photographs. During a time when there was no roadmap for emerging photographers to follow, he created a path for himself by trusting his intuition. At various crucial stages in his career, he made decisions that at the time might have been considered to be unconventional or even unwise. In this video, I'll concentrate on some of these impactful decisions that contributed to his development as a photographer. In 1962, after studying painting and art history, Meyerowitz landed a job as a magazine art director. One day he was overseeing a shoot in downtown Manhattan, and he found himself in the same room as Robert Frank.
Watching him was so astonishing that it changed my life. I had one of those epiphanies that just made me think that photography could actually satisfy some unspoken desires that I was searching for, and that only the camera can tear out of the moving whole of life this fraction of a second that has some kind of meaning.
Meyerowitz knew nothing about photography, and he assumed that the subjects would have to remain still. But Frank kept moving and coaxing his two young subjects to remain active. He realized that this guy was shooting movement rather than a static scene. Frank never said a word to him all day, but Meyerowitz was deeply affected by the experience, and from that point on, he began to see the world differently. Everywhere he looked, he began to see movement and color. When Meyerowitz returned to his office, he told his boss that he was quitting his job to become a photographer. His boss, in an attempt to change Meyerowitz's mind, made the mistake of pulling out Frank's The Americans to show him the type of photographs that a truly great photographic artist produces. This second appearance of Frank within a short period of time convinced Meyerowitz that he should make the leap. He was still a shy kid when he hit the streets with a borrowed Pentax. He didn't know anything about photography and was overwhelmed by the activity around him. The streets were filled with people, the light was continually changing, and he couldn't coordinate his ideas with his camera actions fast enough. The first question he had to face was, how does one choose what to photograph?
One of the first things that every photographer learns as soon as they pick up the camera is there's a frame. And so how do you make your work different from anybody else's? So it's what you put in the frame, and it's where you cut the rest of the 360 degrees. It's that alignment that validates again and again your sense of where you need to be in space, when you need to raise the camera to your eye.
His initial solution to this dilemma was to take pictures, print them, then spend time studying and discussing them with other photographers. In New York, he worked on the street alongside friends and contemporaries including Gary Winogrand and Todd Papageorge. He also on occasion approached John Sikowski. Meyerowitz said, "None of us knew how to talk about photography back then. John created the vocabulary. He invented the language for contemporary photography through his books, but mainly through his shows. He was a photographer as well as a curator, so we all listened." Sikowski obviously saw a glimmer of promise in Meyerowitz's early work and included one of his photographs in the 1964 group show called The Photographer's Eye. This was an extremely encouraging moment for Meyerowitz, especially because Sikowski hung one of his photographs alongside one of Frank's. At the time that Meyerowitz was beginning his street work, the photography elites believed that color was for amateurs. Walker Evans was reported to have said that color photography is vulgar and tends to corrupt the medium. Initially, out of ignorance, Meyerowitz started photographing in color because he wasn't actually aware that it was regarded as uncool. He thought the world appeared to him in full color, so that's how he'd photograph it. He later discovered black and white and produced some really strong images, full of interesting juxtapositions and humor. But he wasn't convinced that this was the way for him to move forward. When he went out on the street, he carried two Leicas, one loaded with black and white negative film, and the other with Kodachrome color transparency. He was trying to understand how these two mediums induce different responses from the photographer as well as from the viewer. Eventually, he made the choice to switch to color. He believed that it allowed him a richer and more intimate engagement with his subject matter. He saw black and white's tendency towards abstraction as a limitation when it came to describing a scene.
I photograph in color on the street because it describes so much more than black and white. It's a much more exciting description of what we see. And it's a half step closer to reality, too. It makes it tougher. It's not just a photographic rendition as we used to, an abstraction. It's much more confusing and maybe even convincing to see what life looks like in color.
Because of William Eggleston's 1976 landmark MoMA exhibition, it's often believed that he had pioneered color art photography. But 7 years earlier, Eggleston had visited Meyerowitz at his apartment. Eggleston brought along a box of black and white prints, while Meyerowitz produced a collection of hundreds of color pictures. Only in recent years has Eggleston acknowledged the impact that this visit had on the trajectory of his career. Soon after shifting to color, Meyerowitz was faced with another decision. He felt the need to create more space within his scenes in order to distribute interest to include all of the details within the frame. This affected the way that he approached a subject.
If I need to get the entire depth of field of the street with color film, which was so much slower than black and white, that you couldn't always get the entire range of the street, I would have to step back from the normal 7 or 8 feet that I worked at. The incident that would hook the picture would be further away, and it would sort of lack the kind of guts that it used to have for me. But I took that on. I was willing to make failed photographs in color by stepping back so that I could then see all over the frame and make the content everything in the frame. I remember when I started showing some of these experimental further back pictures to my close friends, other street photographers, they kind of looked at me like, you've lost your touch.
Instead of focusing in on a central aspect, he pulled back, allowing the different elements within the frame to compete for attention. So he was shifting away from Cartier-Bresson's idea of a decisive moment in favor of a multifaceted approach. This changed his perception of what was interesting on the street. He had to let go of shooting an incident and needed to become aware of the variety of actions and connections that were occurring around him. He found that he was now searching for a more complex type of picture.
When you put the frame up to your eye, the world continues outside the frame. So what you put in and what you leave out are what determines the meaning or potential of your photograph. But you must continue to keep in mind that it's plenty of stuff off stage. And what bearing might the rest of the off stage have on this? It leaves certain things ambiguous or unspoken but impinging upon. And I believe that that recognition, as well as the power of the frame to put disparate, unrelated things together. When I think about my photographs, I understand that my interest all along has not been in identifying a singular thing, but in photographing the relationship between things. And if my pictures work at all, at their best, they are suggesting these tenuous relationships. And that fragility is what's so human about them.
This modification to his practice required him to remain alert to the unexpected, to sharpen his ability to anticipate, and also broaden peripheral awareness. He realizes that he owes a debt to his father, who taught him to be street smart. He had grown up in the Bronx, a tough working-class neighborhood, and he had to be alert to what was going on around him.
And my father taught me how to defend myself, because there were gangs that roamed the streets, and he was a champion boxer in an amateur way, and he always said to me, people are going to telegraph what they're going to do. You just have to know how to look at them to see what they're going to do. He said, so pay attention. The world is going to tell you about itself was a kind of astonishing piece of news for me.
Meyerowitz famously said, anything you have done well is worth letting go of. So to continue growing as a photographer, he decided to move on from street photography. By 1976, he was no longer happy with the print quality that he was achieving from shooting 35mm film. So he bought himself a 1938 Deardorff 8x10 view camera. It was made from mahogany, brass, and had a leather bellows. He spent 2 summers photographing the coast, small towns, and inhabitants of Cape Cod.
I went to Cape Cod because it's a family place. I wanted to go someplace where I could be away from New York City, where I wouldn't have to think about what I was missing on the streets. And the Cape gave me the chance to see simple things, ordinary American things, the landscape, the light.
The large format camera required him to step back even further and slow his pace. He had to give up the instantaneous gestural response associated with a 35mm camera, but he tried to maintain a sense of immediacy. He would always keep his camera close. If he went for a drive, the camera was next to him on the passenger seat, and if he went for a walk, then it was on his shoulder. If he came across a scene that moved him, his camera was ready to make a quick picture. So in a way, he was bringing a street attitude to his 8x10 work. The photographs from this project were used in his influential book, Cape Light. Over 150,000 copies were sold, and it launched a completely new phase in Meyerowitz's career.
You know what it's like? It's like learning another language. It's almost like I switched from being a jazz musician making a riff on the street to somebody playing in an orchestra with a cello.
After the destruction of the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, Meyerowitz felt compelled to document the aftermath using his 8x10. Initially, he was turned away by police on the grounds that the site was a crime scene, but he was determined. By establishing strong links with firefighters, policemen, and construction workers, he became the only photographer to be granted unimpeded access to Ground Zero. He started photographing 10 days after the buildings had fallen, and the heat from underground was still hot enough to melt the soles of his boots. He worked on the project for 9 months, and Aftermath, World Trade Center Archive was published in 2006. The photographs were installed as a permanent exhibition in the museum at Ground Zero. I'll run some more of these images, But thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you next time.
Photographs look like pictures, but they're really about your ideas. Things that you think are important to you, things that you observe about the world at large that you think are worthy of commenting on. That's how you connect to your identity. And bit by bit, these identity points in your work create a body of work, a through line that shows you again and again your particular way of looking at the world. And after a while, it looks like you. It has your distance in it. It has your tempo. It has your sense of humor. It has your thoughtfulness or the gravity of your ideas. Whatever the hell it is, it identifies you because you've been able to be consistent about it.